Okay. Hello. 16 November. Weekly Marks. Welcome to um, what I think will be probably the continuing series of 3 o'clock Saturday and 3 o'clock Sunday sort of things. There's a film noir later tonight and tomorrow night. Star Trek Returns is in its the second edition of the second season. And that's all exciting as well, hopefully. But in terms of our weary work, I thought that something that might continue through this, since I think a lot of people have, some people anyway, have become interested in modern money theory, and that monetary questions remain. And I thought that I would try and provide not only a through line of that sort of stuff, but also something that covers the work that I've been doing. Um, Partially because it's just figuring out stuff. That today's thing I'm going to do is to read from the 1844 economic and philosophical manuscripts, the one of the earlier commentaries by Marx on money. It's very short, and then I'm going to read the chapter from a collection, an anthology, I guess, I suppose, edited by Fred Mosley on Marx and money, which is actually quite good and very important for a lot of different reasons. And we'll start with the chapter 2, but I'll stop at hopefully our regularly established time. The first 1844 bit is not very long. So that's kind of where we're going to go for a couple of weeks, I suppose, assuming that I continue on with these matters. The Grundrisse has a thing on money, which of course happens after this economic and philosophical manuscript thing from 1844. So that's, you can sort of see the evolution of Marx on money. He's always aware of money. It's just that trying to convert it, that is, find out these equivalences to labor, because he's, of course, working on this labor theory of value. Not always the clear to people, much clearer perhaps to Marx, but maybe even not that. Considerable texts in the interim, but more importantly, as Duncan Foley points out, we've been neglecting it for decades. And if you want to say that modern money theory is sort of the sanitized version of Marx on money, you can, although there's a fair literature that tries to disassociate the two, which is interesting as well, for all the usual reasons that we've talked about before. Was Minsky a Marxist? What Kalecki obviously a Marxist, but they're people who do it for various reasons, or who reach at least a point in their lives. If you become a member of the ruling government in various places, they don't mess with you at Harvard. Whereas if you don't quite have that imprimatur, things get difficult, particularly after the Cold War and after the Vietnam War. Invariably, the climate shifted at Harvard, and hence the UMass Amherst department was created from a bunch of folks who studied under all those quote unquote Marxists at Harvard. But it's pretty clear that they weren't going to try and continue that, only because, all the usual ideological reasons, capitalist reasons. All right. Marx on money. It's going to be a long slog on the one hand. On the other hand, I think at each moment we'll be able to figure out other things that are contemporary and that are applicable. Okay, 1844, economic and philosophical manuscripts. The power of money. If man's feelings, passions, etc., are not merely anthropological phenomena in the narrower sense, but truly ontological affirmations of being, that is, nature, and if they're only really affirmed because their object exists for them as a sensual object, then it's clear that, number one, they have no means, merely one mode of affirmation. They have by no means merely one mode of affirmation, but rather that the distinct character of their existence, of their life, is constituted by the distinct mode of their affirmation. In what manner the object exists for them is the characteristic mode of their gratification. Number two, wherever the sensuous affirmation is the direct annulment of the object in its independent form, as in eating, drinking, working up of the object, etc., this is the affirmation of the object. Number three, insofar as man, and hence also his feeling, etc., is human, the affirmation of the object by another is likewise his own gratification. Number four, only through developed industry, for example, through the medium of private property, does the ontological essence of human passion come into being in its totality as well as in its humanity. The science of man is therefore itself a product of man's own practical activity. Number five, the meaning of private property, apart from its estrangement, is the existence of essential objects for man, both as objects of enjoyment and as objects of activity. By possessing the property of buying everything, by possessing the property of appropriating all objects, money is thus the object of eminent possession. The universality of its property is the omnipotence of its being. It is therefore regarded as an omnipotent being. Money is the procurer between man's need and the object, between his life and his means of life. But that which mediates my life for me also mediates the existence of other people for me. For me, it is the other person. Here, other things are being quoted. What, man? Confound it. Hands and feet and head and backside, all are yours. And what we take while life is sweet is that to be dedicated, declared, not ours. 6 stallions say I can't afford, is not their strength my property. I tear along a sporting lord as if their legs belong to me. Goethe, Faust, Mephistopheles saying that, and Shakespeare in Timon of Athens. Gold, yellow, glittering, precious gold? No, gods, I am no idle votarist. Thus, much of this will make black white, foul, fair, wrong, right, base, noble, old, young, coward, valiant. Why, this will lug your priests and servants from your sides, pluck stout men's pillows from below their heads. This yellow slave will knit and break religions, bless the accursed, make the whore, leprosy adored, place thieves, and give them title, knee, and approbation with senators on the bench. This is it that makes the wappened widow wed again, she whom the spittle house and ulcerous sores would cast the gorge at. This embalms and spices to the April day again. Come, damned earth, thou common whore of mankind that puts odds among the rout of nations. And also later, more Shakespeare, oh, thou sweet king killer and dear divorce, twixt natural son and sire, thou bright defiler of Hymen's purest bed, thou valiant Mars, thou ever young, fresh loved, and a delicate were whose blush doth thaw the consecrated snow that lies on Dian's lap, thou visible God, that solderest close impossibilities that makest them kiss, that speakst with every tongue, to every purpose, O thou touch of hearts, think thy slave man rebels, and thy virtue set them into confounding odds, that beasts may have the world in empire. Shakespeare excellently depicts the real nature of money. To understand him, let us begin, first of all, by expounding the passage from Goethe. That is, that which is for me through the medium of money, that for which I can pay, that is what money can buy, that I am myself the possessor of the money. The extent of the power of money is the extent of my power. Money's properties are the possessor's properties and essential powers. Thus, what I am and what I am capable of is by no means determined by my individuality. I am ugly, but I can buy for myself the most beautiful of women. Therefore, I am not ugly, For the effect of ugliness, its deterrent power is nullified by money. I, according to my individual characteristics, am lame, but money furnishes me with 24 feet. Therefore, I am not lame. I am bad, dishonest, unscrupulous, stupid, but money is honored and hence its possessor. Money is the supreme good. Therefore, its possessor is good. Money, besides, saves me the trouble of being dishonest. I am therefore presumed honest. I am brainless, but money is the real brain of all things. And how then should its possessor be brainless? Besides, he can buy clever people for himself, and is he who has, or he who is, power over the clever, not more clever than the clever. Do not I, who thanks to money am capable of all that the human heart longs for, possess all human capabilities or capacities? I'm sorry. Does not my money therefore transform all my incapacities into their contrary? If money is the bond binding me to human life, binding society to me, connecting me with nature and man, is not money the bond of all bonds? Can it not dissolve and bind all ties? Is it not therefore also the universal agent of separation? It is the coin that really separates as well as the real binding agent. One word in the manuscript cannot be deciphered. The chemical power of society. Now, Marx goes on. Shakespeare stresses especially two properties of money. Number one, it is the divine, or it is the visible divinity, the transformation of all human and natural properties into their contraries, the universal confounding and distorting of things. Impossibilities are soldered together by it. Number two, it is the common whore, the common procurer of people and nations. The distorting and confounding of all human and natural qualities, the fraternization of impossibilities, the divine power of money lies in its character as men's estranged, alienating, and self-disposing species nature. Money is the alienated ability of mankind. That which I am unable to do as a man, and of which therefore all my individual essential powers are incapable, I am able to do by means of money. Money thus turns each of these powers into something which itself it is not, turns it, that is, into its contrary. If I long for a particular dish or want to take the mail coach because I'm not strong enough to go by foot, money fetches me the dish and the mail coach. That is, it converts my wishes from something in the realm of imagination, translates them from their mediated, imagined, or desired existence into their sensuous, actual existence, from imagination to life, from imagined being into real being. In effecting this mediation, money is the truly creative power. No doubt the demand also exists for him who has no money, but his demand is a mere thing of the imagination without effect or existence for me, for a third party, for others, and which therefore remains, even for me, unreal and objectless. The difference between effective demand based on money and ineffective demand based on my need, my passion, my wish, is the difference between being and thinking, between that which exists within me merely as an idea and the idea which exists as a real object outside of me. If I have no money for travel, I have no need. That is, no real and realizable need to travel. If I have the vocation for study, but no money for it, I have no vocation for study. That is, no effective, no true vocation. On the other hand, if I have really no vocation for study, but have the will and the money for it, I have an effective vocation for it. Money is the external, universal medium and faculty, not springing from man as man or from human society as society, for turning an image into reality and reality into a mere image. Reality into a mere image transforms the real essential powers of man and nature into what are merely abstract notions and therefore imperfections and tormenting chimeras, just as it transforms real imperfections and chimeras, that is, essential powers which are really impotent, which exist only in the imagination of the individual, into real powers and faculties. In the light of this characteristic alone, Money is thus the general distorting of individualities, which turns them into their opposite and confers contradictory attributes upon their attributes. Money then appears as this distorting power, both against the individual and against the bonds of society, which claim to be entities in themselves. It transforms fidelity into infidelity, love into hate, hate into love, virtue into vice, vice into virtue, servant into master, master into servant, idiocy into intelligence, and intelligence into idiocy. Since money, as the existing and active concept of value, confounds and confuses all things, it's the general confounding and confusing of all things. That is the world upside down, the confounding and confusing of all natural and human qualities. He who can buy bravery is brave, though he be a coward, as money is not exchanged for any one specific quality, for any one specific thing, or for any particular human essential power, but for the entire objective world of man and nature from the standpoint of its possessor. It therefore serves to exchange every quality for every other, even contradictory quality and object. It is the fraternization of impossibilities. It makes contradictions embrace. Assume man to be man and his relationship to the world to be a human one. Then you can exchange love only for love, trust for trust, etc. If you want to enjoy art, you must be an artistically cultivated person. If you want to exercise power or exercise influence over other people, you must be a person with a stimulating and encouraging effect on other people. Every one of your relations to man and to nature must be a specific expression corresponding to the object of your will, of your real individual life. If you love without evoking love in return, that is, if your loving as loving does not produce reciprocal love, if through a living expression of yourself as a loving person you do not make yourself a beloved one, then your love is impotent, a misfortune. So perhaps you don't get anything from all of that. It is, of course, an earlier position of Marx, sort of before all those revolutions, when Marx thought of himself in many ways as a literary person rather than someone a bit more radical. And so his sense of engagement is sort of a little more open. The idea of, well, what does money mean? What is it? How does it individualize me? Is it corrupting, perhaps? And so he's looking to literature to see those other kinds of things. And remember, this is the same period Marx is writing other kinds of stuff. He writes a play, I think, during this whole business. So stuff happens. But money goes on. And for many, 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 many years, there was not a lot of writing on Marx on money, probably because there were too many other things going on. Imperialism, war, but of course, you have to finance war. You have to, try and figure out a way to sort of get people engaged and organize and have revolutions and that kind of stuff. Not enough is spent on it. But I'm going to read now from Duncan Foley's chapter in give me a second here. Well, that's not working. Give me a second. Here we go. I've included the whole chapter in the thing that I've put up on Medium, but it's easier to read in its original typeset form for a variety of reasons. After being largely neglected by Marxist scholars in the first two-thirds of the 20th century, with some exceptions such as Rubin of 1972, Marx's theory of money has been the subject of a substantial number of books and articles in the last 35 years. Among others, de Brunoff, which is kind of the first cut at this, of 1976, Duncan Foley's 1983, Arnon 1984, and Ito and Lapasvidas of 1998. This work shows that the theory of money is an indispensable part of Marx's theory of value and among the most original aspects of Marxist economics. Now, recall the diagram that I made that I transferred from Harvey, etc., about the structure of argument in Marx's Capital, Volume 1. That money is clearly a part of deriving from the commodity, starting with the commodity and going to money as a commodity form, and then money, sort of a money form to money itself. That's kind of what's being worked on here. Marx derives the money form of value from the theory of the commodity as a unity of use value and exchange value, and shows how a particular produced commodity, such as gold, will emerge as the socially accepted general equivalent, which functions as a measure of value for all the other commodities. Since Marx regards labor as the substance of value, the money commodity also expresses abstract social labor in commodity exchange. From this starting point, Marx is able to provide a coherent account of the whole range of monetary phenomena known to his period, including the circulation of paper money, the valuation of inconvertible paper money, the circulation of worn species coins, the laws of circulation connecting the quantity of circulating money to the prices of commodities circulated, hoarding, and ultimately the role of money as money capital. So hopefully you can see there's all these things going on at the same time. Marx does not neglect all of these things. They just have their kind of place in this entire system. This theory also provides a coherent and satisfactory foundation for the theory of interest as a form of surplus value and credit. This is where Marx is going, right? He's trying to figure out, well, all these things turn into a kind of abstraction. Money itself is an abstraction, but you can see how further Marx is working on this capital problem, that, what is money's relationship to that? And by extension, what is labor's relationship to that? What are you working for in that particular kind of sense? Now, what we'll do further on is look at, Grundrisse, the chapter on money, and Marx 1859. So we're looking at the preface to the critique, blah, blah, blah. So we're going to try and look at these in subsequent weeks to try and get more into this, to understand that, and yes, if you've been looking at modern money theory, there is a critique that says, well, none of this makes any sense or relation. Let's put that in abeyance for the moment. Not that the critique isn't valid. I'm just saying that, I think one needs to engage it directly, because a lot of arguments made about subsequent elements of this, like rent, for example, among many other things, requires one to understand this sort of basic stuff before you sort of make that argument. Because even if you buy all that other stuff that modern money theory might disclaim, eventually you're going to come back to this thing, and it does exist, it doesn't not exist, and so you have to sort of deal with it, and it's still an important component, and whether it's going to cause a revolution or not is a whole different question. But the fact is that it does exist, and it does serve as a major component of how surplus values develop. This chapter addresses two issues that are still unresolved in contemporary discussions of Marxist theory. The first is the relation between abstract social labor, which is what we were talking about in chapter 1 of volume 1, and money, and the measurement of the value of money, or the monetary expression of labor time. That is, the abstract social labor time, the SNOL, expressed by a unit of money. The second is the problem of adapting Marx's theory of money to contemporary monetary systems in which the debts of states, modern money theory, expressed as dollars, pounds, euros, or yen, for example, function as the socially accepted general equivalent rather than a produced commodity. So these are definitional issues that are kind of vital. And as I've tried to suggest that other folks are working on this kind of problem, because now that we have computers, we can actually sort of work through the actual empirical elements of them. Number two, labor and money in Marx's theory of value. In empirical applications of Marxian theory, that is, in Straussian studies, Piero Sraffa, who was at Cambridge, Straussian studies using Vasily Leontiev's input-output data, labor is identified with measured labor time, unadjusted hours of employment. This practice is acceptable and even probably inescapable in applied work, but it distorts Marx's full account of the relation between money and abstract social labor. A lot of ink spilled on this. Marx takes up this issue at length in the Grundrisse, Marx 1973, the chapter on money, which that's probably where we'll go next. The motivation for Marx's discussion is his critique of the Ricardian socialists Bray and Gray, who argued for replacing gold with a labor-based money. And this argument actually appears a lot of other times in other kinds of ways. You know, utopian socialists kind of pick up this idea. Stuff goes on. It's still an important idea, but not, maybe it's not quite good because now we have computers, etc. The idea was that when someone expended labor effort, that person should receive a certificate representing that quantity of labor time, which could then be exchanged for a proportional part of the social product. In this scheme, labor certificates would take the place of money as the means of circulating commodities and supporting the social division of labor. Now, Marx objects to the labor certificate plan on the grounds that it just short circuits an essential function of the commodity system of production. The actual sale of commodities for money tests the validity, the expectation that any particular labor expended is indeed social and necessary labor. It is only after sale, that is, after exchange, that the social and necessary character of the labor expended in producing a commodity is guaranteed. The commodity producer produces the commodity on a speculation that the market will validate the social and necessary character of that labor. You see, it's sort of, you could say that is it a unnecessary abstraction of the concept? Similarly, you could say that company script, that is the money form that you would use if you lived primarily in a company town because it couldn't be converted into some other currency, has a kind of function like that, which is problematic for all of its own exploitative reasons. Marx argues that the labor certificate reform would work only if labor were immediately social in production, so that the labor certificate could be a simple acknowledgement that social and necessary labor had been expended. But this would be possible only if the social and necessary character of the labor were guaranteed in production itself, independently from the market sale of the commodity. This guarantee could only be achieved in a system where production itself is socially rather than privately organized. The labor certificate issuing bank would have to organize production on a social basis to begin with. The apparently innocuous labor certificate reform would require a complete socialization of production, not just the issue of labor certificates. So I hope that you can see that this would be, I think, in the intuition in the 19th century, it's kind of bureaucratic and, has other costs that are associated with it. The implication of these observations is that abstract, social, necessary labor, which is the substance of value, emerges jointly with the expression of exchange value. So you have the substance and the expression of exchange value in the pricing of commodities in terms of monies. These have already been abstracted once. There is no general ex ante before prior method of measuring the abstract social necessary labor expended in producing commodities independent from the whole process of exchange of commodities mediated by money. Marx himself sums this up in the contribution to the critique of political economy. This is not 1859, right? the different kinds of individual labor represented in these particular use values, in fact, become labor in general, and in this way, social labor, only by being actually exchanged from one another in quantities which are proportional to the labor time contained in them. Social labor time exists in these commodities in a latent state, so to speak, and becomes evident only in the course of their exchange. The point of departure is not the labor of individuals considered as social labor, but on the contrary, the particular kinds of labor of private individuals. That is, labor which the particular kinds of labor of private individuals proves that it is universal social labor only by the supersession of its original character in the exchange process. Labor which proves that it is universal social labor only by the supersession of its original character in the exchange process. Universal social labor is consequently not a ready-made prerequisite, but an emerging result. Thus, a new difficulty arises. On the one hand, commodities must enter the exchange process as materialized universal labor time. On the other hand, the labor time of individuals becomes materialized universal labor time only as a result of the exchange process. So you see this exchange, the exchange issue is actually very important, as we know from Heinrich, etc. Department 1 and 2 is kind of like that, kind of discussing, well, okay, stuff gets produced, but it's really only in the process where you begin to think about how things are distributed that it begins to gain kind of importance, let's put it that way, a kind of meaningfulness or materiality in that sense. This point, which has been emphasized by DeVroy in 1981, among others, sweeps away the whole range of objections to the labor theory of value based on the observation that it's impossible to aggregate many different kinds of labor into a single index of abstract labor time, just as it is impossible to aggregate species of aggregate apples and oranges. This objection is brought up by Baumgartner. And there's considerable argument about this towards after Marx, and Engels kind of gets engaged in this, or as in Capital, concrete labor to describe the variety of real world labor. In commodity exchange, these concrete labors are equalized through the establishment of prices for the commodities they produce. No ex ante, that is, prior weighting of different types of labor to create a single empirical measure of social labor time is part of Marx's theory of value at this level of abstraction. There's just not a kind of means. Marx doesn't quite get this worked out. The objection of adherence to the rational empiricist philosophy of science to this statement of the labor theory of value is that it turns the theory into a tautology. Now, Marx himself says, since the exchange value of commodities is indeed nothing but a mutual relation between various kinds of labors of individuals regarded as equal and universal labor, that is, i.e., nothing but a material expression of a specific social form of labor, it is a tautology to say that labor is the only source of exchange value and accordingly of wealth insofar as this consists of exchange value. So Marx conceptualizes problems through a sequence of more and more concrete determinations. The problem of recovering social labor, this is why we go back to the Grundrisse, because you want to sort of see, well, what did he really mean before he sort of either forgets about it or assumes that you already kind of got this worked out when he gets further on in the Critique of Political Economy. So that's why people go back to the Grundrisse. The problem of recovering social labor time from data on the prices of produced commodities involves working back through these layers of determination. And so the interest in the Grundrisse is trying to look at this, was Marx, he wasn't insensitive to this idea. He didn't forget about the problem. It's just that he, perhaps he just, as I said before, if you had different ways of measuring it, like we do now, we can sort of measure this in a variety of different ways, not simply by labor time. Not that we're going to reduce everything to keystrokes, which is another way that you could try to do it, although it would be an interesting approach. You want to sort of think about it. But it is a measurement problem. That is number 3, measurement issues. is it appropriate to attempt to quantify the relation between social labor, time, and money, given the complex ex post, after the fact nature of that relation in theory? Marx himself does give a quantitative significance to the relationship, regularly assuming, just for the sake of examples, that a shilling expresses so many hours of social labor time. The fundamental motivation behind this measurement is the implicit argument that a socialist mode of production could organize social labor as effectively as capitalism while eliminating the exploitation of labor. Now, this is controversial, needless to say. The translation of monetary macroeconomic aggregates into social labor time expresses this vision concretely. Now, there are objections to this argument connected with the points that Marx raises in his critique of Gray and Gray. Capitalism supports a social division of labor through a historically and institutionally specific mode of production. Any other mode of production would shape a different social division of labor, like feudalism. This observation calls into question the relevance of comparing social labor time in capitalism with the social labor time that might emerge under socialism. Now, this is where analytic Marxism has an issue, whatever, is exploitation occurring, under socialism? And, if you argue for it, then people will go, well, that's not a very good argument for socialism. Another reason for being interested in the quantitative relationship between money prices and social labor time is the belief that social labor time regulates or determines money value aggregates. The theory of value outlined in the last section does not completely support this idea, since it emphasizes the simultaneous emergence of social labor time and the expression of exchange value in terms of money. In other words, you're getting paid on spec, for example. And often that's a kind of issue for some people, even though you may be quite, you have considerable advanced knowledge, you're only being paid at the hourly rate, let's put it that way. A process in which it is impossible to identify one or the other pole as the ultimate determining factor. On the other hand, it is reasonable to suppose that the social organization of production evolves on a slower timescale than the formation of money prices. So empirical measures of social labor time will be more stable than empirical measures of value added. So this is where you're contrasting the kind of accounting measure of value added to a system of processes to the other kind of big abstraction called social labor time. Thus, there is some political economic insight to be gained from considering the quantitative relationship between empirical measures of money value added, such as gross or net domestic product, and empirical measures of social labor time. If you're more interested in this kind of development, this is a part of it is used as the argument about domestic labor, female domestic labor more specifically, but you can see that this is where some people are headed. There's all this stuff that's not included in the national income accounts that, women are doing women's work, so to speak. The central issue in using quantitative measures is to get some insight into limits to the rate of exploitation and therefore the magnitude of surplus value that a capitalist economy might generate. This type of analysis is the foundation for answering questions connected with the rate of profit in capitalist economies. Now, this rate of profit, of course, as we know, just let me break for a second here, say, the rate of profit issue is important for some people in terms of arguing for, well, if it declines and then it verges into crisis, and then we get a revolution, and then we can have socialism and, eradicate some of this stuff. And that's kind of a bridge too far at this moment in history, perhaps. Maybe, maybe not. The wage share in gross domestic product expresses, after the fact, the proportion of paid labor time in a capitalist economy. The monetary expression of labor time, that is MELT, and you'll see this referred to elsewhere, the ratio of money value added to the total social labor time decomposes into indices, that is indexes of price change and labor productivity. So you can see ratios that become indices, where M is the MELT, P is a price index such as the GDP deflator X, is the index of real value added corresponding to the price index, and N is some empirical measure of social labor time. There's an equation, and it's in the writing, where M equals PX over N equals PX over X times X over N. And, that's a minor expansion. The importance of labor productivity in capitalistic, it's the only equation here, so don't get too crazy. The importance of labor productivity in capitalist economies lies in the fact that real use value wage, your paycheck, plays a key role in the class relations between workers and capitalists. The measurement of value added, P times X, raises interesting problems. See, for example, the discussion in Sheikh and Tonak of 1994. This is where, Anwar Sheikh at Amherst tries to sort of see, well, can we estimate this for national economies? I mean, can you actually use the real data that's out there that the IMF and the World Bank, et cetera, have, and actually start measuring stuff? This is an important question, and one that, well, with all due respect, should be taken up by, the central bank. But anyway, the Fed. The measurement of social labor time, N, however, raises more fundamental issues of aggregation because labor time takes qualitatively diverse concrete forms. Exchange value is a one-dimensional quantity, but the quantities themselves as use values and the labor that produces the commodities are qualitatively varied. How does social exchange equate seemingly incommensurables? Marx suggests two complementary approaches to the measurement of social labor time, as distinct from its determination together with prices as discussed above. Now, the first is to reduce labor to a common denominator, that is a uniform, homogeneous, simple labor. And, this is comparing simple labor to unskilled labor. This is, you're trying to work out, well, what counts as being productive? You can see that other arguments derive from this, what counts as productive versus unproductive labor, and you can get in the weeds. But here's Marx. But what is the position with regard to more complicated labor, which, being labor of greater intensity, greater specific gravity, rises above the general level? This kind of labor resolves itself into simple labor. It is simple labor raised to a higher power, so that, by example, 1 day of skilled labor may equal 3 days of simple labor. Now, that's kind of an interesting way to divide it, but, you could say if you've been doing nothing but simple labor, that 1 day of skilled labor may not necessarily be this, but you could, you can see that there's an empirical issue that at some moment in the day you might actually sort of think about, well, how do I measure this? Keystrokes, lifting one's arm, the amount of blood coursing through your head, whatever. Thus, each concrete individual labor should have a skill weight attached to it, and the weighted sum of the individual labors will be the quantitative measure of social labor time. Now, this seems straightforward enough conceptually, but leaves some questions unanswered. For example, Marx seemed to regard simple labor as fungible between sectors of production so that any average individual can be shifted from one line of production to another with no change in total social labor time. But some difference in social labor may adhere to the sector of production. If mining, for example, is inherently more dangerous than weaving, an hour of mining might produce more value added than an hour of weaving. You can see already this is a problem. And you can see that this becomes a problem in one sense for thinking in a Soviet way, right? Well, mining is more important because men do it, and the role of weaving thereby is not as whatever. The exchange process practically equates the labor time of miners and weavers, but finding the appropriate weights remains a problem for an econometrician who wants to estimate an index of social labor time. And this is why, tabular approaches into input-output analysis becomes important for some folks, actually very important for the Soviets. You don't quite get this worked out. I think it would have been better, with a computer, et cetera, but, they don't have them. This Marxist econometric problem overlaps with neoclassical labor economics, which also faces the problem of reducing qualitatively diverse labor to a single index. One method is to use weights based on the personal characteristics of workers, such as education, age, or experience. And you can see where this could go, right, with tailorization, the height and what abilities of workers at speed. The data necessary to find these weights may, however, be hard to come by, and a common experience suggests that the correlation of formal worker characteristics with productivity may be weak, but it doesn't stop Marx from talking about the difference between child labor and adult labor. Another method is to use weights proportional to the wages of individual workers. The use of wage weights amounts to the assumption that labor of different qualities is all subject to the same rate of exploitation. Now, this is a tempting approximation for empirical work, although there is the danger of circular reasoning if someone uses wage-weighted measures of labor inputs to test hypotheses about the rate of exploitation of different kinds of labor. You can see it's apples and orange. It becomes apple and orange-ish again. Marx also outlines a second approach to the measurement of social labor time. And this is Marx in the 1859 text. Now, the labor of an individual can produce exchange value only if it produces universal equivalence. That is to say, only if the individual's labor time represents universal labor time, or if universal labor time represents individual labor time. The effect is the same as if the different individuals had amalgamated their labor time and allocated different portions of the labor time at their joint disposal to the various use values. Now, this mention of a kind of joint labor is, has a whole bunch of folks well, not a whole bunch. Some people have gone down this path, and that's worth talking about at some moment. This approach regards social labor time as a dose of all the qualities of labor in fixed proportions. It amounts to the assumption that different qualities of labor are present in the same proportions in all sectors of production, but leaves open the question of whether different qualities of labor are subject to the same rate of exploitation. The rates of exploitation of different qualities of labor in this framework are indeterminate, since the imputation of value added to the particular kinds of labor in a dose of labors of different qualities is arbitrary. See, you have to sort of make up a measure. How are you going to do that? Do you do that simply by practice? Do you do it because women are shorter generally than men? Or, how do you do this? It has problems. This method leads to estimating the MELT, the MELT, as the ratio of a measure of value added to the number of employed workers or to unweighted total labor time. Now, you could say that's a cop-out, but, it's something, I suppose. And, for people who are writing papers on this stuff, you sort of, you set it and you sort of figure, well, if other people are going to try and set that, maybe we could all sort of work this way. But, whatever. Back to the text. The econometric method of measurement of social labor time is a pragmatic issue. What are we going to use this measure for? If we're interested in measuring the rate of exploitation of labor over time in one country, quality weights of labor may not be relevant. If we're interested in the degree to which international foreign exchange markets equate social labor across different countries, some adjustment for the quality differences in labor between countries is unavoidable. That is, clothing made in Bangladesh versus clothing made in Eritrea, whatever. As always, in econometric research, data availability and cost are central issues, where more accurate weighting of different types of labor cannot be achieved with available data or only through time-consuming manipulation of data. Remember those computers. A simpler but more robust estimate of social labor time may be the best we can do. So, number 4 is contemporary monetary systems, but I think I am getting close to my end time. And of course, I hit the wrong button here. But I'm going to say that yes, I've reached the end of my moment of time here. And so what I will do is ask if there are any questions or comments or brickbats. Every man, every time, all day. Indeed. Okay. Sort through section 4 uh, of the Foley piece. It's not much longer to the end. I may finish it therefore tomorrow. Um, and hearing no particular comments or questions, I will stop the live stream. We can go back to our regularly associated stuff, of which I don't know what's happening, except that they're at 6:30 to 7. We will begin a film noir, as I recall, and that would be very exciting. But otherwise, I hope that people will bring the news. Certainly enough has happened.